Hi friends, it's Kate. Welcome back to my sketchbook. Today I am painting a magical little cabin landscape in acrylic right here in my Canson mixed media sketchbook. It's 11 by 14 inches and 96 pounds paper weight. And I'll be using Liquitex and Creative Inspirations acrylic paints and just a few colors: burnt sienna, phthalo blue, crimson, lemon yellow, and titanium white. I had also pulled out lamp black and Van Dyke brown, but I didn't end up using those two colors at all. The inspiration for this acrylic painting comes from a whimsical A-frame cabin with another picture of a tree and some gardens I found in photo references on Unsplash, which I will link to below. I printed them to keep them handy while I painted. You'll notice that I'm using a white soft chalk pastel to sketch my scene, and I love using this on a dark background for two reasons. First, it shows easily, much better than pencil, and it's also easy to wipe away if you change your mind and make a mistake. I didn't quite like the placement of my tree, so I erased it easily. It was too large and competed with my cabin, which I really wanted to get most of the attention. My main goal for this painting is for it to feel playful and colorful in an abstract impressionist style with lots of paint mixing and using a limited palette. Using a limited palette is really helpful if you want all of your colors to be cohesive. It also gives great practice for color mixing and learning how your paints work together. And as you can see, I am starting on top of a purple underpainting, and that's been one of my favorite tricks lately. And even though purple isn't part of the final palette, it creates a foundation that adds a bit of richness and depth and some additional harmony as I layer the colors on top. So I started off in this video really just putting in that sky in the background. And next I'm just sort of mixing together some of the burnt sienna with some white and different shades and tints so that I can have some variation in the wood, and that will kind of give me a little bit of a foundation for when I add some more texture and some highlights and shadows later. But we have sort of the base of our wood pieces. But one of the things I've really loved experimenting with lately is these brightly colored underpaintings, and especially colors that would seem unusual given the palette I'm using. I've been so pleasantly surprised by some of the results I've gotten, and I really wanted to continue exploring this. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you might have seen some of my sketchbook pages that have started with even bright orange underpaintings, and they just give this real rich look to the finished painting. And you can see little peaks and pops of it coming through to the top layers, and it also helps get your colors cohesive too. One of the reasons I like working with a limited palette like this is, one, it gives you so much creativity with your color mixing. You know, it's surprising how much color you can get just with a few. I mean, really, all of our colors come from our primaries, and getting some practice mixing those, and there's no wrong way to do it. If you just mix until you like what you see, really, and that's kind of how I work on my mixing palette that I have here. And you just can kind of play around and everything ends up going together, because once you get far enough along in the painting, everything is just kind of a mixture of another color you have. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the concept of a mother color, but a mother color is basically a color that no matter how many colors you have in a painting, there's a little bit of it in every single one. So it would be like if you're working with 10 colors, let's say, or 5 colors or 3 colors or whatever it is, and your mother color might be a blue or a purple or a burnt sienna, and you just add a little bit to everything that you do. And it doesn't even have to be enough to really change the look of the color, but it just helps it kind of bind together and everything looks like it belongs. Another thing that I'm getting a lot of practice at in this painting is values. Values, I have found, make a world of difference in a finished painting. It can make something flat, like everything is the same, to looking really vibrant. And me, in my personal paintings, I'm often hesitant with pushing values very far, and the result of some of my paintings can feel like something's missing. And when I was first starting out, I really didn't know what was missing. I just knew that it was something. But it turns out that value is hugely important in just making it look like it has depth. When you start adding more darks, the brighter colors pop and depth is added. And you'll see a lot of examples of pushing values in this painting. And if that is something that you struggle with, maybe this video can help with that, because I really struggle too. And it's something that I'm always trying to practice, because I think I've mentioned in some earlier videos that I tend to do a lot of midtones. And you'll even see in this, I've got a couple of parts where I kind of put a little note in that everything, even if you're working with different colors, if they're the same value, they kind of look the same and they blend into each other. So you don't really have anything that sticks out. And that's what makes it look so flat when you have your finished painting. And so the deeper you can work your shadows, and you also have your highlights in there, and still midtones. It's not like you don't want midtones at all, but you want to have a big variety of values in there, and it just helps make everything pop. And I think one of the ways that it really makes itself known in this painting is with that cabin. I really tried hard to get some nice deep tones on it, and if I didn't feel like it was deep enough, I would go back and make it even deeper. And you can see that little window there where I just put that really dark mark, and to me, while I'm painting, it's almost like jarring to look at. But then once you have all of the rest of your colors in, and even the bright ones, it just really helps it pop, and it gives it that depth. It looks like that window actually has a shadow under it. And I'm not trying to be realistic in this painting or anything, but having those just simple dark values mixed with lighter values just makes a huge difference. And a good example of the blending in here is I have that dark, or the sort of medium brown pathway, and it really kind of blends in next to that grass before I added that extra white. And I'm going to add a lot more contrast later on to this, but you can just see how the path doesn't really stick out at all, even like this, and it just kind of looks the same. And it's not green, it's brown, but it still looks the same. As I go through this painting, I'm kind of picking one section at a time to work on. And while I do that, other sections can dry so that I really don't need to take any breaks to wait for paint to dry. And luckily acrylic dries pretty quickly anyway. But you'll see how I just go back and forth adding layers. So my first layer, you'll see I just really wanted to block in those big sections with the garden and the fields in the background and the tree. And I'm picking sort of a single base color to paint on there that I can add some more detail to later. But my first detailed object is this cabin, which I just love the picture of. And I love putting this little finishing touch on it, which I guess, you know what, I'm actually not finishing touch because I do add some more values. But I love that little horseshoe decoration on the front in the photo reference. It just really made me happy to see that hanging above the door. And I'm just adding some more texture to the wood, and now I'm working on adding some more value to those shingles. And the more layers that I'm adding, the more it's really starting to come to life. And like you can see, I'm just making simple brush strokes. I'm not trying to be hyper realistic or anything like that. I am really just having some fun with paint, focusing on values and getting my basic shapes in line so that, you know, my proportions are mostly correct, or if I have different proportions, it's something that I'm trying to do. For instance, making that tree much smaller in the background so that it doesn't take over the whole painting. But the rest of it is just pushing and pulling. And I ended up struggling a little bit with the grass in the front later on, and you'll kind of see that. But, you know, just that push and pull of value again, and being able to have just some variation in your colors and marks. And so I'm starting to work on that now, adding some lighter colors, some darker color, and I'm just mixing things together. Now, if you mix very many complementaries, so what I'm doing is I'm mixing a basic sort of green color, and then red and green are complementaries, and so the red will really tone it down. So then it ends up being kind of like a darker olive green with a bit of a bluer tint to it. And I just really want to get a lot of variety of color in my grass. And again, here I'm not being careful with my brush strokes or anything. I'm just getting that down on the paper with variety. And then I'm going to put some nice deep color on here because it just didn't really pop. And so mixing that phthalo blue with the burnt sienna really helped deepen it up and give me that wonderful shadow color. And I'm going to come back to this also and add some more values, but I thought that it looked much better having that deeper color up front, which actually in the photo reference, it's kind of a deeper color as well. So like I said at the beginning, I'm really using just 5 paints for this whole painting. And I had originally pulled out 7, but I didn't even use all of those. And those 5 colors right now have given me this huge variety, and it will give me even more still as I start using more of the crimson and work on my flowers and things like that. And I have a large variety of greens. I've got a lot of different browns, and I've got some nice deep shadows and bright highlights. I've got a rich blue sky, and all of that is just from four colors plus white. white's a huge one, just to change your values of your colors. And I think I'm sounding like a broken record on the values. I just keep mentioning those, but they're just so important and something I've just been trying so hard to practice with. And, going through this was just really such a study in that, and also, really using underpaintings more as well, and just seeing the way it kind of shines through. Like in the sky, you can still see a tiny bit of that purple here and there, and it just adds a little something. Even if you can't tell that it's purple underneath, it just adds something to that blue. Or if you're looking in that field way in the background under the tree, where you can still see some of that purple going through. And that actually was a layer of acrylic ink. So I had a little bit left in a little bottle of ink that I got from Michael's. It's actually Artist Loft brand, and I just wanted to use it up. And so I ended up just painting over this page, and that is serving as my base for this video today. So I really love how the colors are starting to work together here, and we're starting to get some more definition in the different parts of the painting. I loved the little cabbage fields, and I just loved making those little rows and adding the shadows under each little cabbage head. And like you can see, it's just brush blobs. Now, I did end up going back over that first cabbage highlight that I painted because it was just a little bit too bright white. I didn't want it to be so jarring, so I just kind of toned that down a little bit. But I thought that the rest of them turned out really nicely. And now I can start working my way back on the other layers that have dried since I put down the first coat. And so next is that sort of middle section with a flowery field, I suppose. And so I added a little bit of brighter color, and I'm adding a little bit of a darker reddish purple. So I'm utilizing that phthalo blue again and mixing that a bit with my crimson. And then in some of the parts, I'm using a little bit more crimson to give it just a little bit more brightness. I think having a little bit of saturation there is a good thing, and it's something else that stands out, because everything else in the painting is kind of green and brown, except for that little strip of flowers, which I thought added a lot of nice, just bright color to the painting. So you can see now where I am starting on that back field, and I started off with a really light yellowish green, and I'm starting to add a little bit more variation. I'm even adding a little shadow to it by tossing in a little bit more of the burnt sienna, and then you can see I'm mixing that with the lighter color, and I'm just making it a little bit more detailed. But since it's so far in the background, I just want it to be very sort of cloudy and just some little bits of variation in color. And then I'm also going to be working underneath my tree. So I took back a little bit of the trunk, and I'm going to start adding a shadow area under there. And so for the tree, I really wanted it to be where the tree just kind of blends into the shadow on the ground without a hard line anywhere. And so that's what I'm working on now, and I'm doing it little by little. and just trying to find that good balance of dark and light. And so I'm going to be putting the deepest shadow area straight under the tree and have it kind of blend out a bit to the side areas. And now I'm working on adding some more value to my tree leaves. So I'm just being kind of scattered with my brush and just letting things blend together. And I'm putting in some lighter values here, and then I'm also going to add some of my sky back in that gets covered up, and a little bit of a lighter color, and then I'll add some branches back in that you can kind of see coming through the tree. And that tree, I picked it out because I thought it had a fun shape, just like the cabin did, and I'm so glad that I did. They were two completely different photo references, but I thought they worked so well together. But I'm also glad that I kept the tree small, because where I had originally put it before kind of thinking about it for a second, it would not have worked as well for me. So you can see I've just added shadows back in, and now I am working in my sky again, adding another layer, making it look nice and wispy and cloudy, and then adding some additional blue to the top so that when you're looking at the top of the sky, it's a little bit darker than when you get off to the horizon. And then I'm adding some of that sky popping through on my tree again. I need to open it back up to the air. And then I'll also be adding some more brightness to my grasses. Now this is where some of that brightness kind of went off the rails. So, you know, you have your values and your darks and your lights, but you should have midtones. And so this, and I realized it, you know, kind of immediately, but it was just like I'm slapping down it's not white paint, but it almost looks like white paint over that dark green. And so I end up working a little bit more on the grass, but if you ever have that sort of reaction, it might be just that you need a little bit more of the midtones in there. If you have kind of a jarring contrast. But I'm going back over to my cabin again and getting those details in there, and I'm just kind of looking around my painting at this point because we're starting to get into the home stretch, and I'm letting my grass dry a little bit and working on some other elements. And I realized that all that time I spent working on the cabin, I didn't actually add shadows and highlights to the little chimney for I'm imagining a wood stove. So I'm just popping those in real quick, which makes that chimney have a really nice contrast against the sky. And then I'm adding some last highlights on those shingles because I had added in some lighter marks back toward the earlier part of the painting, but as acrylic dries, it tends to darken just a little bit. So sometimes you need the color to be a little bit lighter than what you originally anticipate, because it does tend to darken just a couple of shades or so as it dries. So my highlights ended up blending into the background, so I wanted to add some of those back in. And now I'm just making my grass worse by adding even more light color on the top. And what really needs to happen is that I bridge that gap between the lights and the darks. It's just it's just so different sitting next to each other. So it's very abrupt. And so I end up realizing that. So I just grabbed a baby wipe and wiped back a little bit of that color. And I'm still going to add some highlights, but I'm also going to add some more deep color back into it to put some of that darker value back in that I took so much out. And so here I am with a little bit more of a mid-tone green that's not quite so bright. And then I'm going to also add some darker green as well. And the last thing I think that I wanted to add here was some flowers. And I don't think there were any flowers in the original photo reference, but I wanted to bring a little bit of that pinky purple color up to the front so that it was in another spot on the painting. So I just started putting in some little blobs, and I started off dark, and then I'm going to make it a much lighter pink so that the flowers also have their own little shadows. And in a few of the spots, I'm going to add a little bit more of the more saturated crimson. But this was such a magical little cabin landscape, and it's full of color, deep values, and just a little bit of that purple glow from underneath. And I really hope that this inspires you to try an underpainting and pushing and pulling values in your own artwork and see how it transforms your colors. The experimentation process is just so fun to do, and you just never know what you're going to get. Now, as you can see, my painting does not look like the photo at all. And I really like this style of more loose painting with less detail. It lends a bit of a dreamy feel, and as I keep painting in acrylics, I seem to gravitate to this more and more, whether I'm painting something from my imagination or using a photo reference like I did here. If you enjoyed painting along with me or playing this video in the background while making some beautiful art of your own, I'd love it if you subscribed and joined me for more art videos. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, keep creating.